Extraterrestrial. 40 years ago, came out directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Henry Thomas, Drew Barrymore, as well as other people, telling the story of a young boy named Elliot who's longing for something better in his life, runs across this alien who's mistakenly left behind by his own kind, with Elliot having to find a way to get him to go back home. I've only watched this movie a few times in my 32 years. I mean, that's not really saying much. But every time I do, I always get a lump in my throat, especially in the end, when E.T. says goodbye to Elliot. And rewatching this movie, I was kind of surprised to see just how very simple and straightforward the plot is, but yet there's a right amount of complexity and depth and emotion that's thrown in there. Spielberg is the right kind of guy that you want to put behind the camera with a plot like this. Putting someone in a very extraordinary situation with some really out of this world, apologize for the pun, type of presence that's there, and we as the audience are able to connect with the character of Elliot, who's longing for something worthwhile in the midst of his boring routine of a life. For him to make a movie that's about a friendly alien, a big departure from the usual types of aliens that we see portrayed in film or in television, like in War of the Worlds or Independence Day. Wasn't the first time that he did something like this. Close Encounters of the Third Kind a few years prior was the prime example. This movie also served as a huge inspiration for many pieces of media, including Super 8 by J.J. Abrams and the Netflix series Stranger Things. From the opening scene of the film, for myself, the movie immediately hooks you. E.T. being left behind in this desolate forest, or as he sees it, being hunted by these strange human beings that he's never encountered before in his life, more than likely. And his ship decides to leave when they don't see him coming, and tries to find at least somebody that he can talk to, or at least something, some way, in order to contact his people to get him back home. Elliot stumbles across him, and eventually as they connect, they're able to form a bond, a close friendship. And this movie, I think, in a lot of ways, addresses the idea that your best friend doesn't have to necessarily be a human being. It could be something else, something that you probably would not expect, but it's something that you never really knew that you desperately needed. It's an unlikely friendship, but a very touching and heartwarming one. Henry Thomas is a joy as Elliot, very endearing and very sympathetic. Because when we were kids, I would imagine we were like Elliot at one point, who longed for something better than what he had, which is the typical protagonist in a story like this, where he feels like nobody really understands him, including his older brother Michael and his brother's friends who antagonize him constantly. Also having a mom who's desperately trying to keep the family afloat due to the repercussions of her husband leaving her for somebody else. Not just Henry Thomas, but the other kids in the film are a joy to watch as well, including the young Drew Barrymore. I believe this was her first breakout role in Hollywood. Her line delivery, it just feels like something that she would say in any movie that she's done since then. The snarky looks that she gives Elliot and Michael when they try to convince her that only kids can see E.T. And it feels like a natural sibling bond between the three, and how they try to threaten her to not tell everybody else about E.T. when they threaten to take her doll away. Then you know what's going to happen. Oh no! Oh no! This movie also does something that I guarantee you would not pass in today's day and age, when Elliot calls his brother a certain type of, somewhat of a profane phrase.
Maybe an elf or a leprechaun.
It was nothing like that, penis breath!
Elliot!
As for the mom, there's not a whole lot of focus on her, but with the actress's performance, I think it's enough to convey to the audience that she's having a really difficult time with her 3 kids and trying to deal with the fact that her husband doesn't want her anymore. I wish that we got more scenes like that, and if I remember correctly, there was an alternate cut for this movie where certain things were changed. I think I might have seen it at one point in time, maybe it was an extended version, I don't know. I just remember certain moments from that cut that I didn't see in this one. Like when Elliot pours water over the phone when his mom won't let him get him off the phone. He says, "Mom, I'm gonna puke on the phone if you don't let me hang up." And the one scene where Elliot and his friends are with E.T. being chased by the cops, and the 2 cops have their shotguns ready. I've seen the picture of them holding walkie-talkies instead. That kind of a small change doesn't really bother me, but it's pretty clear that it was almost like Spielberg tried to do the George Lucas thing with the Star Wars Special Editions way before all that happened. But thankfully, Spielberg has allowed his original cut to be a coexisting partner alongside his new extended edition, or whatever he calls it. Something that George Lucas should have done with the special editions. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. I also couldn't help but notice certain types of product placement in this movie. I don't really get distracted by product placement stuff, but I guess for myself, I tend to notice certain things that exist in real life, or at least something similar to it, like the Star Wars toys that Elliot has in his room of Boba Fett, or the TIE bomber that's hanging from his ceiling. Probably other people have said this, but the Reese's Pieces. Apparently, M&M's turned down the offer to have the M&M's be shown in this movie, and Reese's Pieces got it instead. More than likely the reason why Reese's Pieces were so popular in the 80s after that. We also get a really funny scene with Elliot's telepathic connection with E.T. when he's in the classroom about to dissect a frog. E.T. drinks some beer that he finds in the fridge, which causes Elliot to get drunk and hungover. And he goes to kiss this girl that's kind of interested in him, and he's kind of interested in her back, kind of at that weird age where he starts to notice certain things, i.e. puberty. And as E.T.'s flipping through the channels and comes across the movie Quiet Man with Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne, and the two have that famous kissing scene, and Elliot does the exact same thing with the girl that he's crushing on. Random, but also on paper, you would think that that's probably not gonna fly. No, don't do it. But somehow Spielberg manages to make it work. I don't know how, but he did. As for the design of E.T., pristine perfection. I literally just thought of those two words. It's a practical puppetry type of thing or animatronic. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't look or feel fake. It looks like an actual alien. The sound effects and the moisture that's on E.T., like the watery type of stuff where it feels like he's an actual living creature, it still holds up all these years later. And certain scenes that I couldn't help but notice reminded me of Jurassic Park when he's sitting in the shadows and he's making those sounds. Kind of reminded me of the velociraptors in the first Jurassic Park. And the fact that he's able to heal Elliot's wounds or paper cuts or whatever, and how he tries to heal his brother's supposed wound with the knife prop that he's got over his head. Michael tries to tell him, no, it's a fake, it's not real. And also, it's been talked about many times, but I just love how he's drawn to that kid in the Yoda costume, and I would imagine maybe somehow the Star Wars universe really exists in the world of E.T., since George Lucas apparently had E.T.-like creatures in Phantom Menace in the background during one of the Senate meetings. Was that saying something? Maybe it was a joke, but it is something worthwhile thinking about, I suppose. Not to mention the fact that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are real-life best friends. So I suppose there's always bound to be connections between the two. Since I mentioned Star Wars, John Williams' musical score, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it at all. What else can I say? But there were a couple times where I couldn't help but feel like there was a bit of a Star Wars flavor in there somewhere. This came out around the same time as the original trilogy, so I would imagine he brought some of those musical idea cues into the soundtrack for this movie, and Spielberg naturally would not pass up on that. Not to mention the one that plays over the famous bicycle against the moon scene, or in the final scene when Elliot says goodbye to E.T. And inevitably, the government ends up finding E.T. and they do all these kinds of experiments on him, which Elliot was very weary about, trying to get E.T. to go back home, which they managed to send out a signal through one of his toy walkie-talkies. And it seems like E.T. has passed away since he's apparently growing really homesick from being away from his home, hence why he's starting to look like he's dying. The scene where he ends up dying literally rips my heart out of my chest, especially when you see Drew Barrymore reacting to what's happening when they're using the defibrillator on him. Oh, man. But then, due to the friendship that he shares with Elliot, he's able to come back from the dead, basically. And when they finally encounter Michael's friends out in that park, and they open the doors, and he's got this white robe, and all this smoke is starting to come out, and he's standing up all peaceful and bliss. Pretty obvious what they're alluding to with the Jesus imagery. But hey, I don't care. I think it's a beautiful shot. And inevitably, they find their way to the forest where they meet E.T.'s mothership, and he says his goodbyes to everybody, including Elliot. And I swear to God, this line, every time I watch it, I start to bawl.
I'll be right here.
I'm gonna cry right now thinking about that. E.T. is a movie that I think you can laugh and cry and get scared, get excited over, and the emotions don't feel out of place. It feels like a perfect balance of all of those emotions, and this remains among Steven Spielberg's best movies. Probably even the top 5 or maybe even top 3, I don't know. If you haven't seen this movie, what? What are you doing with yourself? It's E.T. Come on, you cannot pass this up. I know some people who aren't really crazy for this one, especially my sister, who was freaked out by E.T. when she first watched it. And whenever I do this, she always slaps my hand away. So thanks again, guys, for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on E.T., whether you love it, like it, think it's alright, or if you hate it, which I don't see how you could hate E.T., but opinions are opinions. Thanks again, guys, for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, like what you see? Don't forget to like and subscribe.